I can do this. I'm gonna hide my powers and be a normal man having a normal day, starting now. Okay, I had to say—
There has been one superhero that hasn't only defined what the word truly means, but also has had a place in animation throughout its history. That superhero is none other than Superman, and he's back in his latest outing, ready to soar in My Adventures with Superman. From his many iterations, such as Superman the Animated Series, Ruby Spears' Superman 1988 Animated Series, and even Justice League Unlimited, the Man of Steel showcased what he did best: battle evil while saving the lives of the citizens of Metropolis. But few depictions have ever defined what Superman was like outside of his costume and in his daily life. My Adventures with Superman attempts to explore that, as we see in the opening with Clark as a young boy trying to reach a kite that's stuck in a tree. Most people who know this character knows that he can reach that kite since we expect him to do so. This actually introduces the character in a very unique way that is greatly appreciated. Besides Clark wearing a white and red shirt with an S on it, foreshadowing his destiny, we see him being the boy that the Kents raised him as. His powers finally manifest as he saves a quite irresponsible mother driving her car with her baby in it from crashing into a tree. Here we get the gist of what kind of character they are trying to portray him as: curious, unsure, and exuberant. This intro was quite effective due to the brief but thorough execution. We all know who Clark is by now, from years of stories written about him. It doesn't need to be anything more than what's shown here. Flash forward. We are taken to his life as a young adult, preparing to start his new intern job at the Daily Planet, of course. We see that he's just learning to control his powers so he can live a normal life, which of course doesn't pan out that way. This is Superman we are speaking of here. We are also introduced to Lois, who is also a young intern at the Daily Planet. She's just as spunky as she's always been, but now presented with a more youthful and modern sheen. This is Lois Lane, front and center. She is well presented here. And of course, with little time wasted, she manages to get Clark and Jimmy into one of her shenanigans. That involves her trying to investigate a story that involves robots, with total disregard to Perry White, by the way, which involves the likes of the show's very first villain, Leslie Wilkins, but better known to comic fans as Livewire. It isn't too long until Clark ends up taking up the task of being a hero to save Lois, of course. This version of the character seems to be weaker than I remembered him being. He is actually bested by those robots and acquires a swollen eye in the process. It was quite odd to actually see him afflicted with physical damage, since Superman is known to be quite powerful in the comics. That vulnerability actually makes him more relatable. Also, we start to see him slowly develop his powers in the episode. The setup of the episode does put the character on his path, but we don't get the entire direction of where the series wants to go. If it was just this episode that had set up the entire series, it would have been a bust. To be honest, the episode was quite shallow outside of the main fight scene. Fortunately, the premiere is positioned as a two-parter, despite both episodes not actually taking place back-to-back. In the second episode, it opens up with another flashback to Clark's childhood, but this time Martha and Jonathan Kent take Clark out to the spaceship he came to Earth in as an infant. We see how much Martha and Clark are scared about what's in the spacecraft. The Kents are depicted the same as they always are, the loving parents who raised the boy from a distant planet as their own son. The same can't be said about Jor-El, who appears as an holographic projection that emerges from the spacecraft. speaking Kryptonian, by the way. Usually, Jor-El is depicted as a younger man and communicates in earthly language. Here, he is full gray and sporting an eye patch. His depiction feels more accurate due to him being an alien. I presume that as Clark finds the Fortress of Solitude, he will be able to decipher the language and finally understand what Jor-El was trying to communicate to him. But this language barrier doesn't stop Jor-El from giving Clark the iconic suit in a Sailor Moon-like transformation sequence. This was kind of weird to see, but nothing that took away from the character. Hopefully they keep that as a one-time thing. Speaking of that, the episode continues to explore the same question. Who is Clark? Despite him not being sure of that, he still takes on the responsibility of being a hero and saving Lois and Jimmy's bacon in the process. That unselfish act of heroism is always what made this character who he is. The episode captures that here as he faces off against Livewire. By the way, Slade Wilson is also introduced in this episode as well. Definitely look very different from his depiction in the comics. Whether the look works for the character is a matter of opinion. I will say that if I didn't see his name in the credits, I would have thought it was just some mysterious character instead. Nevertheless, we do get to see him display his fighting prowess, so that definitely stands for something. Which brings me to the depiction of the characters, the proverbial elephant in the room. In other words, Jimmy and Perry are race swapped. My take is that if it isn't major characters that are a huge part of the story, it can work. Here, it does. As for Lois, there are some that might not like her look, but you have to remember, they are going for something modern. This is taken into account. Whether I like it or not is a matter of opinion. From what I've seen so far, it works here more or less. The presentation in terms of animation is mostly on par with WB Animation's catalog of animated films, even down to the character designs. They have that usual sheen to them, but here they do it a little bit different. See, the pastel-like coloring scheme for the backgrounds work for the most part. Speaking of backgrounds, there's a major gripe I have with them. It seemed that the littlest effort was put into them. The scenery in some of the scenes looked so bland. Sometimes the simplistic approach can work in the favor of the artist and the product, but here it doesn't work as they were too inconsistent. It was quite glaring to look at due to how well the characters themselves were drawn. It made the backgrounds look out of place because of it. Here's hoping this isn't on par for the course of the series. In other words, this is a very low standard for WB animation.
You're right. I am Black Ops.
And you're right. I am the smartest one here.
My Adventures with Superman does aim to bring audiences a modern take of the Man of Steel. And judging from these two episodes, it shows a lot of promise. But I couldn't help but notice that these two episodes didn't have much going on in them outside of the action scenes, which was quite sparse for a cartoon of this caliber. Unfortunately, this was due to the focus being put more into the dynamic of the three interns and Lois and Jimmy trying to get that scoop. Clark isn't much of a focus in these two episodes. And when it does focus on Clark, everything just felt brief. But it did hold some importance in building his character, such as Lois wanting to know who Superman is, which she named him by the way, Clark figuring out his place in the world, and the endearing romantic chemistry that's building up between Lois and Clark. Any comic book fan or fans of Superman in general knows where this will eventually go. Also, the pacing of the episodes just felt a little flat, and I will go as far as to say that the story could have been told in one episode. Despite having a great intro, the first episode just felt like it was just there. The second episode is where most of its story kicks into gear. In all, My Adventures with Superman shows a lot of promise, and this take on the character is definitely one to look forward to, with how it sharpens Clark into the man that he is destined to be. Seeing his journey into being a young adult and navigating the world ahead of him promises to be something special, a take that hasn't been seen on television since Smallville. And on top of that, it does allude to bigger things behind the scenes and where Slade's allegiance was aligned with.
The Man of Steel is back, and it's
Time to see him on his journey to save Lois's bacon and become the man of tomorrow.
If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me! Great!
I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help.